Audio Netting by Andrew Musgrave. We instantly sensed there would be trouble. The squad of uniformed, burly men raced up the cobbles from the harbour. Dad was trawled roughly from the house, his legs trailing behind him like parallel stems of burrs snagged in a sheep's fleece. Mum and I followed fearfully at a discreet distance. We knew where they would be heading. A launch was waiting beside the jetty, its turbines impatiently churning the acrid flotsam of the harbour's murky water. As the launch sped away, we could see Dad partially free himself and shouting to us. The wind and surf muffled his words, and the message was lost. Mum yelled back as loudly as she could and cupped her hand to her ear to indicate she hadn't heard what he'd said. Again he shouted. I saw his lips mouth, "It's important." But the wind just carried the words to I don't know where. Then the boat was too far from the shore and around the headland, and he was gone. What was your dad trying to tell us that was so important? Mum stood beside me, aghast, helpless, and only now had tears the opportunity to fill her eyes. Where are they taking him? I wish I knew what he shouted. If only he'd shared more of his secret mission with us. Now we will never know. I put my arm around the shoulder of my tearful mother. Now that I was a student, I was smart enough to know what was going on.
Mum, never say never. We can find a way.
And that is how our incredible invention was put into action. Forget telephones and telecommunications. Think AN, audio netting. Cradling a steaming mug on the kitchen table, I explained to Mum those parts of the secret Dad had entrusted to me. The physics degree I was currently studying helped the project become more tangible. I needed to take her back to basics.
Mum, you know about how light travels? When you turn a torch on, its light starts travelling, see? If you were on the moon and had powerful enough equipment, you'd be able to see the light beam from my torch. But it would take a second or two for the light to reach the moon.
When she tentatively nodded, I knew I could continue.
If you were, say, in the far reaches of the solar system, it might take months for the light to travel. So you would see the light beam from the torch months later.
If you had powerful enough equipment, she interrupted.
That's right,
I said, proud that I could make my thoughts coherent. Yes, but what's that got to do with what your father was shouting from the boat? Mum seemed to be getting impatiently aggrieved.
Well,
I tried to explain it as best I could.
Just like light travels, so does sound. Only it travels more slowly, see? 1,000,000 times more slowly, to be exact. Just because we couldn't hear him doesn't mean his sound waves have stopped. Don't you see? They are still there, racing through the atmosphere, getting dispersed and jumbled up with all the other sounds. But they're still there, just very, very faint.
Bah, she muttered. I could tell this was going to take some explaining. His words are long gone, she said sceptically, mixed with the wind and birdsong and engine noise.
But
I was preparing Mum for the tricky part. She had to know what Dad and I had secretly been up to in the loft for the past few years.
all we need is a machine that will trap the sound waves, separate them from all the others, and amplify them.
So it's as simple as that, is it? I suppose you've got one in your pocket. She got up to put the mugs into the sink. It all sounds Jules Verne to me.
Yes, it is. And one day we will all have one in our pocket.
I tried to reattract her attention.
It's what Dad has been working on. And now I'm at college, I'm able to help him develop it. Mum, can't you see? Dad has created an incredible invention. We can capture sound from the past. It's not quite finished yet, and it needs fine-tuning, but we're almost there. All this is top secret, but now that Dad's been taken, I guess you need to know. Mum, we must not allow the machine to get into wrong hands.
Mum had stopped drying the mugs. She was held transfixed, trying to absorb what I was saying. So we can recapture Dad's words, is that it?
Possibly, I replied, if we can separate them from Mrs. Smith's cackling over the garden fence and the dogs barking. As I say, it needs fine-tuning.
She pondered a moment, contemplating permutations.
Well, will it record everything he said to me, like a tape recorder? Possibly, I replied. Depends how loudly he was speaking and what the background noises were.
Well then, who needs lie detectors? It sounds a useful tool to have, if it works. She was rubbing her hands with glee, as if it would trump some historic argument of hers. I could sense she was still sceptical and being sarcastic.
Come on, Mum, I'll show you. It's in the loft.
I can't get up there any more. You know that. Can't you bring it down?
No, I can't. It's integrated into the heavy old sewing machine as a deterrent from being stolen. It's too heavy to lug downstairs. Mum, you've got to come up to the loft to see for yourself.
Reluctantly, Mum made her way upstairs to the foot of the ladder that led into the loft. There was only a small entrance to the roof space, and it was a bit awkward even for me, so for Mum, I realised it would be a tight squeeze. This machine of yours.
And Dad's.
OK, this machine of yours and Dad's. As well as remembering things Dad said, does it recall both sides of a conversation? I was kind of wondering if certain parts of a conversation can be expunged. Perhaps she was wondering if it would mince words.
If you want to find out Dad's last words, you need to come up.
Mum had immense difficulty struggling through the narrow gap into the loft. She wondered how she would ever get back down again. Excitedly, I lifted the dust cover that hid the sewing machine.
Ta-da!
I announced proudly as the treasured machine was revealed. Just looks like an old-fashioned sewing machine to me. This is Great-Grandma's old Singer, isn't it? She used it last century. It's an antique.
That's only the cover.
I lifted the heavy top of the sewing machine and folded it over on its hinges to reveal the wooden box compartment below.
Here, Mum, is the crux of the machine. It's all microelectronic parts.
The interior was a spaghetti of wires and a mass of sensors and electrodes.
It's only the prototype,
I reassured her.
What have you done to Grandma's precious sewing machine? I was planning on taking that to the museum. And what are all these wires and bits of metal all about?
She recklessly started poking at the assembly.
Mum, don't touch. You'll displace something. First, we have to switch on at the wall socket.
And what's this cable for? And what's that hole in the roof? In her displeasure, she pointed to a line trailing across the floor and through a tiny hole in the roof tiles, revealing evidence damp was regularly dripping into the house.
That's the transmitter and receiver. It goes to the satellite dish.
Your father said the satellite dish had stopped working and can't be fixed.
That's only because it has now more important functions to perform.
So that's why we can no longer get Netflix.
The transmitter sends out pulses of laser waves at the speed of light, see? They're similar to radio waves. We decide how far back we want the radio waves to transmit using this transformer. We can choose light years if we want, but more likely we'll want light minutes or light seconds. And by stepping up the transformer to increase the power, we can alter the range of time.
I was wondering why our electricity bills have been so high recently.
Let's say, just for example, we set the transformer to 6 months. That's half a light year. When the radio beams have reached their target, they are followed by a final laser pulse, which is programmed to spread out and create a net, a sort of audio barrier trapping any sound that has reached that particular time. That's why we call it audio netting. Now, what is so ingenious about Dad's invention is he has found a way to convert the trapped sound waves into radio waves. These waves are reflected back to Earth, caught in our satellite dish, and in theory we can listen to them.
I'm not sure I've understood. You lost me somewhere in the back of the universe.
Mum, the sound waves are reflected back to Earth at the speed of light, so we can listen to voices from hundreds of years ago and receive the sound in just a matter of seconds.
You sound like a crazed evangelist. Stop your talking and just show me. I raised the lever that lifts the sewing needle up and down.
This turns on the sound,
I said helpfully.
Dad had fixed the components for an amplifier inside the upright stem of the sewing machine, and the metal grill is where the sound comes from. It's all to keep the illusion that it's still a sewing machine, see, so that spies won't steal it. And we use the foot pedal here as volume control.
I pressed the foot pedal. A garbled noise emitted just below the sewing needle.
These are the noises from space,
I explained.
We don't yet know how to interpret them.
So it's not Martian speaking then? Mum jested.
Oh, Mum, we know there are no Martians. The last space mission proved that.
Well, all I want to hear is your Dad's message, so show me if it works or not.
OK, Dad shouted his message about 3 hours ago. That's, let's see, 1,080 seconds ago. The speed of light is 1,000,000 times faster than the speed of sound, approximately, so we have to divide 1,080 by 1,000,000. That's 1,000th of a second in light years. Then we have to remember the sound has to bounce back again, so that makes 2,000ths of 1 second.
Numbers. Just make the contraption work.
These are only approximate numbers. There is a more exact formula we actually use. The trouble is we can't fine-tune it yet. We haven't yet found a way to separate sounds within a decade, but we're working on it. It's going to be potluck what we get. The results are easier to predict if we go back further into history.
You mean we can listen into what Romeo said to Juliet? Or Mr. Rochester wailing for his Jane, rather than what your dad said to me?
Mum, Romeo and Juliet were fictional characters, and so was Jane Eyre. More likely we could listen into what Caesar said to Cleopatra, or learn if King Alfred really did burn the cakes.
Or what God said to Moses, Mum said sarcastically. I bet half those commandments were made up, to stop others from coveting his own oxen asses. How does your machine separate all the different languages? Tell me that, huh? An accusing finger was prodded toward me.
Well, that would not be a problem if we went back to before they built the Tower of Babel,
I suggested. Look, all I want to find out is if your father really did promise to redecorate the kitchen.
Mum, take this seriously. It really does work. You just have to be patient.
I pointed to the manual wheel on the sewing machine.
This, Mum, is the direction finder. We use this to swivel the satellite dish in the direction the sound originated from.
I turned the wheel just as you might adjust the wheel on the galley of a boat, and aligned it to the harbour. A high-pitched garble emitted from the speaker.
Mum, here it is. I know it doesn't sound much at first. It's just a jumble of noises. It may be sheep bleating mixed with a wind blowing and a car engine. But if there's a person's voice, then the speech isolator will identify it and translate it into audible, intelligent sound. We call it macro rebooting. That's what I helped Dad create. A voice strainer, that separates all the different sounds at microatomic level and translates it into megahertz.
A voice strainer, straining my patience more like. Mum's stance indicated she wanted to leave.
Look, I'm just setting the dial to absolute minimum, so it ought to capture anything we've just said.
Then, just like tuning an old-fashioned analogue radio, audible words started to emerge from the garble of sounds emitting from the speaker.
Voice strainer, straining my patience.
"Those are my words," exclaimed Mum. "I suspect you've just got a recording machine playing back words I've just spoken." A different voice came to the fore. "Did you see what happened to Mr. Jenkins this morning? Dragged out of his house he was. A right strange family, that one." "That sounds like Mrs. Smith from next door." Mum peered through the skylight window and could see Mrs. Smith gossiping to someone whose dog was cocking its leg over our front flower verge. "The cheek of it!" And after she had finished scowling, she flippantly remarked, "Have you got some sort of microphone set up outside, catching all passers-by? I hope you haven't recorded my swearing. What if I was talking aloud to myself, private things, or swore behind someone else's back? Have you got that recorded on this machine of yours?" I could see Mum still wasn't convinced. I needed to go back further in time to capture words that had been travelling for days and months. Hurriedly I adjusted the dial. I must have turned it too far. A crackly voice emerged from the speaker. It was the sound of a demonstration, and it totally baffled me. "Prorogue the rogue!" was being shouted over and over again, and "Boris, out!"
What's that about?
I wondered.
Who on earth is Boris?
"Boris?" pondered Mum. "Now that's a name from the past. Boris. That must be Boris Johnson. Back in the 2020s, when he was President of Europe, he tried to stop the European Parliament from sitting, just like when he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or West Flanders it is now called. What is this machine? Have you got some sort of video player in there?" I turned the dial some more at random, and we managed to catch various snippets in a range of accents, fading in and out amidst meaningless electronic buzzes.
You are fake news.
Sir. Nice to see you.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Dr. Livingston, I presume.
You see, Mum, it does work.
Are you really gathering sounds? Or is there just a trick video player in there?
Mum, it's genuine. We really are listening to the actual words that were uttered in the past, and our machine is able to capture the words and separate sounds into their different components.
"Well, blow me down," exclaimed Mother. "That's genius. Twiddle the knobs a bit further to see if you can catch what Dad said to us at the quayside."
I'll do my best, but I can't promise anything.
I tried to turn the dial back so we could listen in to more recent conversations.
A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Someday, Mum, when we've got our prototype fine-tuned, we'll be able to miniaturise the machine into a handheld console that will be able to capture all the words anyone is saying. Just think how helpful and convenient that would be.
Yes, and how intrusive. You need to be careful with new technologies like these. No wonder the spies are after it. In the wrong hands.
I know. That's why Dad's been careful to keep this a secret.
Prisoners trying to escape from jail could listen in to what the guards were saying.
And I could listen in to when lecturers are setting college exam questions.
Enemy armies could listen in to our own army's plans.
And I could learn before anyone else if I've been picked for the college team, or if my girlfriend's been gossiping behind my back.
We were interrupted. New words blurted from the loudspeaker in an accent we recognised. It's important!
That's your dad, that is. Listen up.
It's important! If the machine recognises my distressed voice, it is programmed to self-destruct exactly 3 hours later. Disconnect it now! So that's the message Dad was desperately trying to relay to us at the quayside. Mum repeated the words.
Self-destruct? Disconnect?
She demanded in a frantic voice.
How long has it been since Dad was captured? I'm not sure, I replied. About 3 hours ago, wasn't it?
And before I could finish my sentence, there was a whir, a sudden surge of electric power, the smell of melting plastic as each diode bulb on the machine sequentially blew, and the numbers on the digital dial flashed randomly before fading for one final time. What was once an ingenious invention blew up in a puff of smoke and reverted back to being a mere redundant antique sewing machine, ready for the museum.
Well, at least the enemy can't get it now, cried Mum with a stiff upper lip. Just think of all the trouble it may have caused if it had got into the wrong hands. Help me back down the loft ladder, will you?